Now, for details of leveling this motor, I'll refer you to lap 1. Leveling the motor is a good description of exactly how to work the shim ratio, and that sort of stuff. The key points here on the adjustable base is, first of all, to get this as horizontal as possible. And to do that, lift up slightly on this base, lower this nut down here a good distance down, because what you want to do is drop this. That's not nearly enough. I would say about 2/3 of the way down with a nut is a good starting point for guessing. And you really just want this, I'd say about eyeball level is good enough. Not really concerned about being exact. Rough, that's good, roughly enough. And all we're going to do here is level the shaft like we normally would. And you'll see the shaft levelment is using a level. And I like to use one of these levels with a trough here because it will kind of snap to the shaft. When we get in the end view of it there, it goes on only the machine part of the shaft. And we use a level bubble to determine levelness. Now in this case, I'll need to do a little bit of leveling. And for that, I'll use a feeler gauge. Come back through with the appropriate feeler until, on leveling it, it just barely fits. And the bubble on top here is exactly between the two black lines. So it's centered as well as possible. When I do that, I can lift back out to read my feeler gauge. If I had to use 2 leaves, add the numbers together. Again, refer to lap 1, leveling a motor, for a good discussion on level, shims, the shim ratio, which is divide the distance of these 2 bolts, actually this side of the bolts, 3 inches, which you measured before in lap 1, versus this shaft length, which should be about an inch and a half, inch and 3/4, depending on where you put the shim, and multiply the number you get for your for the feeler gauge by 3, and multiply by 3 divided by 1.75 to get the shims that you would put on. Now, since I shimmed the front of the motor with the feeler gauge, I want to put my shims up here in front. If I did it to the back, I'd want to put my 2 pair of shims in the back. So I should have matching shims either this side or matching shims over here. I'll go ahead and shim it up, and from that point on, then we'll proceed with putting on the sheath. The sheath will be the next step after leveling. The way I had calculated through all the math, we're basically 8/1000ths of an inch shimming for here and here. That's basically comprised of 0.003 and a 0.005. So I put the pair together, and the proper place to shim for motor leveling will be underneath the motor base. So I gently, slightly lift up the motor to slide my pair of shims underneath the motor base. Then I do the same for the other side. Making sure to catch underneath the bolt. I can center the motor slightly better on the slots. Here what I'm trying to do is put this bolt in the middle of the slot here for adjustment. Once I do that, now it's time to go ahead and tighten down these bolts using wrenches. And since they're 5/16 bolts, that means I use a 1/2-inch wrench and go ahead and tighten down. Keep in mind, we're going again with torque, which means if I start at any one bolt, I'll move to the diagonally opposite bolt for the second, then I'll move to the long ways to the third bolt, and diagonally opposite to the 4th bolt, and work back again. And that's how I tighten the motor. So I'll go ahead and tighten this down, tighten this motor in place then, and then after that, the next step will be to mount the sheath.